When my daughter passed away, my son-in-law kicked me out of my own house, threw my bags into the street, and shouted, "You useless old man, now go live with the beggars." I begged for a chance, but it was no use. The next day, he received an envelope that made him desperately come looking for me. My name is Harold Matthews, and I never imagined that losing my daughter would be just the beginning of my nightmare. At 58 years old, I thought I had seen enough of life's cruelties. But nothing prepared me for what my son-in-law, Marcus Vance, would do to me just hours after we buried my Sarah. The funeral had been small and quiet, exactly how Sarah would have wanted it. She was always the type who preferred intimate gatherings over grand displays. I remember standing by her casket, my hand trembling, as I placed a single white rose on the polished wood. She looked so peaceful, finally free from the cancer that had ravaged her body for 2 long years. Marcus stood beside me, his face a mask I had grown to recognize over the past few months. During Sarah's illness, he had become increasingly distant, cold even. At first, I attributed it to grief, to the stress of watching the woman he claimed to love waste away. But there were moments when I caught something else in his eyes. Impatience, calculation, something that made my stomach turn. After the service, we returned to what had been my home for the past 3 years. Sarah had insisted I move in with them after my minor heart episode. "Oh, Dad, you need family around you," she had said, her voice already weakened by chemotherapy. "Besides, this house is too big for just Marcus and me." I had resisted at first, not wanting to be a burden, but Sarah's pleading eyes broke down my defenses. The house, located in a quiet suburb of Atlanta, was filled with the usual post-funeral awkwardness. Neighbors bringing casseroles they would never eat. Distant relatives making small talk they didn't mean, everyone avoiding eye contact while they picked at sandwiches and spoke in hushed tones. I moved through it all in a daze, accepting condolences with mechanical nods and thank yous. It was around 6 o'clock in the evening when the last guest left. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. I was in the kitchen mechanically washing dishes when Marcus appeared in the doorway. Something about his posture made me pause, the dish towel still in my hands. "Harold, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying a tone I had never heard before. Cold, final. I set down the plate I was drying and turned to face him. "Of course, Marcus. I know this is hard for both of us. Sarah wouldn't want us to—" "Cut the crap," he interrupted, and the harshness in his voice made me step back. "Sarah's gone. Things are going to change around here." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" Marcus leaned against the door frame, his arms crossed, and for the first time, I noticed he was still wearing his funeral suit, but had loosened his tie. There was something predatory in his stance. "I mean, you can't stay here anymore, old man. This is my house now, and I don't need some useless old fart taking up space." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. "Marcus, I don't understand. Sarah wanted—" "Sarah's dead," he snapped, his voice rising. "What she wanted doesn't matter anymore. This is reality, Harold. I've got my own life to live, and it doesn't include playing nursemaid to some pathetic old man who can't even take care of himself." My mouth went dry. "But where would I go? This has been my home for 3 years. My things, Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a sound that made my blood run cold. "Your things? What things? A bunch of old clothes and dusty books? Some worthless photo albums? Give me a break." He pushed off from the doorframe and walked closer, his presence suddenly menacing. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to pack your stuff tonight, and you're going to be gone by morning. I don't care where you go. Find a nursing home. Live under a bridge. I couldn't care less. But you're not staying here. The room began to spin. This couldn't be happening. Not today. Not after burying my daughter. Marcus, please. Can we at least talk about this? Maybe give me a few weeks to figure something out. I just buried my only child. I'm not thinking clearly. No. The word came out like a gunshot. You've had 3 years to figure out your life. And instead, you've been a leech, sucking off my generosity. Well, the free ride's over. Tears began to blur my vision. I had held them back all day, trying to be strong for Sarah's memory. But now, they came flooding out. Please, Marcus, I'm begging you. I don't have anywhere else to go. I don't have much money saved. And at my age, that's not my problem, he said, his voice getting louder. You should have thought about that before you became a burden. You think I don't know what people say about me? Poor Marcus, stuck taking care of his deadbeat father-in-law. Well, I'm done being the good guy. He walked to the front closet and yanked out 2 old suitcases I recognized as my own. They hit the floor with a loud thud. Start packing now. My hands were shaking as I stared at the suitcases. Marcus, please, just give me a few days. I'll call some friends. Maybe find a small apartment. You don't get it, do you? His face was red now, veins bulging in his neck. I want you gone tonight. This minute. Every second. You're in my house makes me sick. He walked to the front door and yanked it open, the cool evening air rushing in. Get your junk and get out, you useless old bastard. Go live with the other homeless bums where you belong. The words cut through me like knives. I had known Marcus for 5 years, had watched him court my daughter, had walked her down the aisle to marry him. I had babysat him through his MBA finals, had lent him hundreds of dollars when his car broke down, had treated him like the son I never had. And this was how he repaid that kindness. With my legs feeling like lead, I dragged myself upstairs to pack. My hands trembled as I folded clothes and gathered toiletries. Each item felt impossibly heavy. A photo of Sarah and me at her college graduation, her first finger painting from kindergarten, that I had somehow managed to keep all these years. The watch she had given me for my 50th birthday. When I came back downstairs with my 2 suitcases, Marcus was waiting by the open door, tapping his foot impatiently. About time, he muttered. Now get out, and don't ever come back. As I stepped onto the porch, dragging my suitcases behind me, I turned one last time. Marcus, Sarah loved you. She would be heartbroken to see. The door slammed in my face so hard it rattled the windows. I stood there in the growing darkness, 2 suitcases at my feet, with nowhere to go and no one to call. The neighbor's porch light came on, and I saw Mrs. Patterson peek through her curtains before quickly pulling them shut. Even she couldn't look at my shame. That night, I slept in my car in a Walmart parking lot, using my coat as a blanket and my suitcase as a pillow. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's face and wondered how I would explain to her that the man she loved had thrown her father away like garbage on the day of her funeral. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus threw me out, and I barely recognized the man I had become. My reflection in store windows showed someone hollow-eyed and gaunt, someone who looked every bit the homeless person Marcus had accused me of being. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had managed to find a spot at the Riverside shelter, a run-down building that reeked of disinfectant and despair. The cots were arranged in rows, like a military barracks, and the thin mattresses offered little comfort against the metal frames. But it was warm, and it was dry, and at 58 years old, I had learned not to be picky about small mercies. My days had settled into a grim routine. Wake up at 5:30 when the lights came on, fold my blanket, and clear out by 7. Spend the day wandering the streets, looking for odd jobs that paid cash. Return to the shelter by 6 o'clock to get in line for dinner and hopefully secure a bed for the night. The hardest part wasn't the physical discomfort or even the constant gnawing of hunger when I couldn't afford a meal. It was the way people looked at me now, or rather, the way they looked through me, as if I had become invisible the moment I lost my address. I had tried calling a few old friends from my working days, but those conversations never went well. Tom Henderson, who I had known for 20 years, actually hung up on me when I mentioned needing a place to stay temporarily. "Sorry, Harold, but we've got our own problems," was all he said before the line went dead. My former colleague, Janet, was more polite, but equally unhelpful. "Oh, Harold, I wish I could help, but you know how it is. We barely have room for ourselves. And with the economy the way it is," her voice trailed off into the familiar territory of excuses I had heard before. The truth was, people were afraid that whatever had happened to me might be contagious. Homelessness made them uncomfortable, forced them to confront how thin the line was between security and destitution. It was easier to believe I had done something to deserve this fate than to acknowledge that it could happen to anyone. But it was the encounter with my neighbor, Carl, that broke something inside me. I had spotted him coming out of the hardware store downtown and approached him hopefully. Carl had borrowed my lawnmower countless times over the years, and we had shared many conversations over the fence between our yards. "Carl!" I called it out, relief flooding through me at seeing a familiar face. He looked up, squinted. Then his expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something that looked like embarrassment. "Harold? Jesus, you look..." He stopped himself, but I could fill in the blanks. "I've been having a rough time since Sarah died," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Marcus kicked me out, and I'm staying at the shelter for now, but I was wondering if you might know of any work." "Look, Harold," Carl interrupted, glancing around nervously, as if someone might see him talking to me. "I'm sorry about Sarah, I really am, but I can't get involved in whatever is going on between you and Marcus. That's family business." "I'm not asking you to get involved," I said quickly. "I just need work, anything. I'm good with my hands, you know that. Remember when I helped you build that deck?" Carl shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly wanting to escape. "The thing is, Harold, times are tough for everyone. I can't afford to hire help right now. I'm sorry." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back. "Maybe you should try to work things out with Marcus. Family's family, you know." "Whatever you did, I didn't do anything," I said, but he was already walking away. That afternoon, I sat on a bench in Riverside Park, watching families play with their children, and wondering how my life had collapsed so completely. An elderly woman sat down beside me, and I noticed she was carefully unwrapping a sandwich. "You look hungry, dear," she said softly, offering me half. I wanted to refuse, to maintain some shred of dignity, but my stomach betrayed me with a loud growl. "Thank you," I whispered, accepting the food gratefully. "I'm Margaret," she said. "I volunteer at the church down the street. You're welcome to come by for lunch tomorrow if you'd like." For the first time in weeks, someone had shown me kindness without expecting anything in return. I had to fight back tears. "I'm Harold, and yes, I'd like that very much." Meanwhile, I learned from overheard conversations at the shelter that Marcus was living quite well in what used to be my home. A guy named Pete, who did odd jobs around the neighborhood, mentioned seeing Marcus loading boxes into a moving truck. "Nice house," Pete had said. "Must be worth a fortune." Guy seemed in a real hurry to get rid of stuff, though. Had a big dumpster out front, just throwing things away like they were garbage. My heart clenched. Those things were probably Sarah's belongings, items I would have treasured forever. Her books, her artwork from high school, the quilt her grandmother had made her, all of it treated like trash. "Did you see what kind of stuff he was throwing out?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Pete shrugged. "Looked like photo albums, some furniture, women's clothing. Seemed like he was clearing house completely. Also saw him with some woman a couple times, blonde, real put together looking. They seemed pretty cozy." The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Marcus was already moving on, replacing Sarah's memory with someone new, erasing every trace of her from the house where she had lived and died. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. That night, lying on my cot in the shelter, I stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how I had ended up here. 3 weeks ago, I'd been grieving but secure, surrounded by familiar walls and memories of my daughter. Now I was sleeping in a room full of strangers, my entire life reduced to what could fit in 2 old suitcases. The man in the cot next to me was coughing again, a deep, rattling sound that spoke of illness and neglect. Across the room, someone was crying quietly into their pillow. These were the sounds of broken lives, of dreams deferred and dignity discarded. I thought about Sarah, about how proud she had been of Marcus when they first got together. "He's ambitious, Dad," she had told me. "He's going to make something of himself." She had been right about his ambition, but wrong about what he would do with it. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I wondered if this was how the rest of my life would unfold. An endless cycle of shelters and soup kitchens, of being invisible and forgotten. I wondered if Marcus ever thought about me at all, or if he had already erased me from his memory, as completely as he was erasing Sarah's presence from their home. What I didn't know was that the next day would bring an envelope that would change everything, revealing secrets that would turn Marcus's world upside down and show him exactly how much he had underestimated the man he had thrown away. I was sweeping the steps of St. Michael's Church when Margaret found me that Tuesday morning. It had been exactly 4 weeks since Marcus threw me out, and I had finally found some steady work, helping Father Thomas with maintenance tasks. The pay was minimal, but it was honest work, and it gave me a sense of purpose that I desperately needed. "Harold," Margaret called out, her voice carrying an urgency I hadn't heard before. She was hurrying up the church steps, her usual composed demeanor replaced by something resembling excitement. I stopped sweeping and leaned against the broom handle. "Good morning, Margaret. You're here early today." She caught her breath and pulled out a piece of paper from her purse. "I have some information you might find interesting. Remember when you mentioned your son-in-law, Marcus? Well, my grandson works at the law firm downtown, Morrison and Associates. He happened to overhear something yesterday that involves someone with that name." My stomach tightened. Anything involving Marcus couldn't be good news for me. "What kind of something?" Margaret glanced around to make sure we were alone, then lowered her voice. "A man named Marcus Vance came in requesting emergency legal services. He seemed very agitated, almost panicked. He was asking about inheritance laws and something about proving biological relationships. The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Vance was Marcus's full name, though he usually went by Marcus White professionally. Did your grandson hear anything else?" "That's just it," Margaret said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "The man kept mentioning something about a mistake, about how he had acted too hastily. He was asking if there were ways to contest biological parentage posthumously." My mind raced, trying to make sense of this information. Why would Marcus be asking about biological parentage? Sarah was gone, and she had never had children. Unless... Margaret, did your grandson mention anything about documents, papers of some kind? She nodded slowly. Actually, yes. Apparently, this Marcus fellow had received some kind of official document that had upset him greatly. The lawyers were trying to calm him down, but he kept saying something about how he had made a terrible mistake and needed to fix it immediately. I felt a strange mix of confusion and anticipation building in my chest. What kind of document could have sent Marcus to a lawyer in such a panic? And what did it have to do with biological relationships? When did this happen? Yesterday afternoon, around 3 o'clock. My grandson said the man looked like he hadn't slept in days. I thanked Margaret and tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept returning to this mysterious development. What could have happened to make Marcus so desperate that he was consulting lawyers about biological parentage? The answer came 2 days later, and it came from Pete, the handyman, who had mentioned seeing Marcus clearing out the house. I was eating lunch at the community center when Pete sat down across from me, his face grave. "Harold, I need to tell you something," he said, glancing around nervously. "It's about your son-in-law." I sat down my sandwich, my appetite suddenly gone. "What about him?" Pete leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was doing some work for the neighbors next to your old house yesterday. I couldn't help but notice there was a lot of commotion going on. Official-looking cars, people in suits walking around with clipboards." "What kind of official cars?" "Well, that's the interesting part," Pete said. "One of them was from the county assessor's office. Another was from some law firm. But the one that really caught my attention was from a private investigation company." My heart began to race. "Private investigators?" Pete nodded. "That's not even the strangest part. Around noon, this fancy black sedan pulls up, and out steps this woman in an expensive suit carrying a briefcase. She marches right up to the front door and hands Marcus an envelope. I swear, Harold, I've never seen a man's face change color so fast. He went from normal to white as a sheet in about 2 seconds. Did you see what was in the envelope?" "Not exactly, but I could see him reading whatever was inside right there on the porch. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold the paper. Then he started yelling at the woman. Something about mistakes and how this couldn't be right. She just stood there, calm as could be, and said something about how all the documentation had been verified. Pete paused to take a sip of his coffee, clearly enjoying having such dramatic news to share. But here's the really weird part. After the woman left, Marcus went inside for maybe 10 minutes, then came rushing back out with a suitcase. He threw it in his car and drove off like the devil himself was chasing him. He left the house? That's just it. He came back about an hour later with 2 other men. They went inside, and I could hear them talking real loud, though I couldn't make out the words. Then Marcus came back out and started making phone calls. I could hear him from my worksite because he was practically shouting into the phone. Pete leaned even closer. "Harold, I managed to catch a few words. He kept saying things like, 'I need to find him, and this changes everything.' And I made a huge mistake. At one point, I clearly heard him say, 'Your name.' My mouth went dry. My name? Clear as day? He was telling someone on the phone that he needed to locate Harold immediately, that it was urgent. He sounded desperate, Harold, like his whole world was falling apart. I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning. What could possibly have been in that envelope that would make Marcus so desperate to find me? The same man who had called me a useless burden and thrown me out like garbage, was now apparently searching for me urgently. Pete, did you happen to see the name of the law firm or the investigation company? He scratched his head thoughtfully. The law firm was definitely Morrison and Associates. I recognized their logo. The investigation company? Let me think. It was something with heritage in the name. Heritage Research, maybe. Heritage Investigations. That afternoon, I walked to the public library and used their computer to search for Heritage Investigations. Their website was professional and understated, specializing in genealogical research, family history verification, and biological parentage confirmation. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a picture, but it was one that didn't make sense yet. Why would Marcus need to verify biological parentage? Sarah was his wife and she was gone. I was her father. That had never been in question. Unless... A thought struck me with such force that I actually gasped aloud, causing other library patrons to look in my direction. What if the investigation wasn't about whether I was Sarah's father? What if it was about whether Sarah was my daughter? But that was impossible. I had been there when Sarah was born. I had raised her from infancy. I had her birth certificate, her school records, everything that proved she was mine. Unless there was something I didn't know, something that had been hidden from me for 28 years. That evening, as I lay on my cot at the shelter, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I thought I knew about my life was about to be turned upside down. Marcus's panic, the lawyers, the private investigators, it all pointed to some kind of revelation that had changed everything. What I couldn't have imagined was just how dramatically that revelation would alter not just Marcus's world, but mine as well. The envelope that had sent him into such a panic contained information that would expose secrets buried for decades. Secrets that would explain why a man would throw away his father-in-law and then desperately search for him just days later. As I closed my eyes that night, I had no idea that Marcus was at that very moment driving through the city streets looking for me, checking every shelter and soup kitchen, growing more desperate with each failed attempt to locate the man he had so cruelly discarded. The truth was finally coming to light, and it would change everything. The revelation came to me not through Marcus, but through a phone call I never expected to receive. It was Friday morning, and I was helping Father Thomas organize the church's food pantry when Margaret approached me with the parish phone in her hand. "Harold, there's a call for you," she said, her expression puzzled. "It's a woman who says she's a lawyer, and that it's very important." My hands trembled as I took the phone. Who would call a lawyer to reach me at a church? "This is Harold." "Mr. Whitmore, this is Amanda Sterling from Morrison and Associates. I apologize for tracking you down this way, but we've been trying to locate you for several days now. We have some very important information regarding your family situation." The formality in her voice made my stomach clench. I don't understand. Why would a law firm be looking for me? "Mr. Whitmore, I believe you know your son-in-law, Marcus, came to see us all earlier this week. What you don't know is why he came to us, and I think you have a right to understand what's happening." I gripped the phone tighter. "What's happening?" There was a pause. Then Ms. Sterling's voice became gentler. "Mr. Whitmore, there are some things about your family history that I believe you're unaware of. Things that Marcus recently discovered, which is why he's been desperately trying to find you. Would it be possible for you to come to our offices? This really isn't something that should be discussed over the phone." An hour later, I sat in a plush conference room that smelled of leather and expensive coffee, facing a woman in her 40s who looked at me with a mixture of professional sympathy and genuine concern. She had a manila folder in front of her, and I could see that it was quite thick. "Mr. Whitmore," she began, "what I'm about to tell you may come as a shock. 3 days ago, Marcus came to our office in a state of extreme distress. He had received some documents from a private investigation firm that he had hired for reasons I'll explain shortly." She opened the folder and pulled out a document that I immediately recognized. It was Sarah's birth certificate. But as I looked more closely, I noticed something that made my breath catch. There were correction marks on it, places where information had been changed. "Mr. Whitmore, are you familiar with the company Whitmore Industrial Holdings?" The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. "No, I don't think so." Mrs. Sterling pulled out in another document, this one looking much more official and complex. "It's a multinational corporation that deals in manufacturing and industrial development. It was founded in 1962 by a man named Harold Whitmore Sr." My heart stopped. "Harold Whitmore Sr.? Yes, your father." The room began to spin. "My father died when I was 2 years old. He was a mechanic. He didn't own any company." Ms. Sterling's expression grew even more sympathetic. "Mr. Whitmore, your father didn't die when you were 2. He lived until 1998, and he spent decades looking for you." The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "That's impossible. My mother told me." "Your mother lied to you," Mr. Sterling said gently. "When your parents divorced in 1967, your mother took you and disappeared. She changed your name from Harold Whitmore Jr. to Harold Matthews, and she told you your father was dead to prevent any attempts at contact." I felt like I couldn't breathe. "But Sarah, her last name was Matthews. How does this—" Miss Sterling pulled out another document, and this time I recognized it immediately. It was my marriage certificate to Ellen, Sarah's mother. But seeing it now, in this context, made details jump out that I had never noticed before. "Mr. Whitmore, when you married Ellen Matthews in 1974, you legally took her surname because you believed Matthews was your real name. You had no idea you were actually Harold Whitmore Jr., heir to a fortune that was being held in trust for you." The implications were staggering. "You're saying I'm rich?" "Mr. Whitmore, you're not just rich. You're one of the wealthiest men in the state, and you have been since your 21st birthday, when the trust should have been released to you. The problem was nobody could find you to tell you." He pulled out a thick stack of financial documents. "Whitmore Industrial Holdings has been run by a board of trustees for decades, waiting for the rightful heir to claim his inheritance. When your father died in 1998, he left instructions that the search for you should continue indefinitely." My mind was reeling. But how does Marcus fit into this? How did he find out? Ms. Sterling's expression darkened slightly. "That's where the story becomes more complicated. Marcus had accumulated significant gambling debts. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was facing some very serious consequences from some very dangerous people." She pulled out bank statements and loan documents. "In desperation, he hired Heritage Investigations to research your family background, hoping to find some hidden assets he could access through Sarah. What he found instead was the truth about who you really are." The pieces were finally falling into place. The envelope that Pete saw was the complete report from Heritage Investigations confirming my identity as Harold Whitmore Jr. and detailing the extent of my inheritance. Marcus realized that the man he had thrown out onto the streets was actually worth more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. I stared at the documents in front of me, trying to process what this meant. So Sarah was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country, and she never knew it. And Marcus, who was desperately in debt and facing serious trouble, had just thrown away his only connection to the fortune that could have saved it to him. Ms. Sterling leaned forward. "Mr. Whitmore, there's something else you need to know. Your father's will contains a very specific clause. If any member of your family, including spouses of your children, is found to have mistreated or harmed you in any way, they are permanently barred from any access to the estate." The irony was breathtaking. Marcus had thrown me out thinking I was a worthless burden, not knowing that I was actually worth more than he could have imagined. And in doing so, he had guaranteed that he would never see a penny of that wealth. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Ms. Sterling smiled for the first time since I had arrived. "Now, Mr. Whitmore, you reclaim your birthright. The Board of Trustees has been waiting 38 years to turn control of the company over to you. You're about to become a very powerful man." She paused, then added, "And Marcus is about to learn that the homeless man he kicked to the curb was actually the one person who could have saved him from the mess he's created for himself." As I sat there, surrounded by documents that proved I was someone completely different from who I thought I was, I couldn't help but think about the cruel irony of it all. Marcus had been so focused on getting rid of what he saw as dead weight that he had thrown away his own salvation. But more than that, I thought about Sarah, about how proud she would have been to know that her father wasn't just some ordinary man, but someone who could make a real difference in the world. The tragedy was that she had died never knowing the truth about her own heritage. As Mrs. Sterling continued explaining the details of my inheritance and what it would mean, I realized that Marcus's desperate search for me wasn't just about money. It was about survival. And the man who had once called me useless was about to discover just how much he needed the person he had so callously discarded. The envelope that had sent him into such a panic had revealed the truth that would change both our lives forever, but in very different ways. The transformation in my circumstances happened with stunning speed. Within 48 hours of that meeting with Amanda Sterling, I went from sleeping on a cot at the Riverside Shelter to occupying a suite at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, while my new legal team worked to establish my identity and transfer control of Whitmore Industrial Holdings. But I wasn't ready to reveal myself to Marcus just yet. I wanted to understand the full scope of his desperation first, to see exactly how far he would go to find the man he had thrown away like garbage. What I discovered exceeded even my darkest expectations of his character. It was Margaret who brought me the first report. She had become my unofficial intelligence gatherer, and her network of church volunteers and community connections proved invaluable in tracking Marcus's increasingly frantic behavior. "Harold, you need to hear this," she said when she visited me at the hotel. "Mrs. Chen from the laundromat called me this morning. She said a man matching Marcus's description came in yesterday, asking if anyone had seen an older homeless man. He was offering $50 for information." I sat down my coffee cup, intrigued despite myself. $50? He's putting up money to find me. Margaret nodded grimly. That's not all. Father Thomas told me that Marcus came to the church yesterday evening, practically demanding to know if you were staying there. When Father Thomas wouldn't give him any information about you, Marcus became belligerent. He started shouting about how it was an emergency and that people's lives were at stake. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same man who had screamed that I was worthless was now telling people that finding me was a matter of life and death. In a way, I supposed it was, at least for him. What did Father Thomas do? He told Marcus that even if he knew where you were, he wouldn't share that information with someone who had clearly caused you harm. Marcus actually tried to argue that he had been helping you, that you had been living in his house rent-free, and that he had only asked you to find more suitable arrangements. I laughed bitterly. More suitable arrangements? Is that what he's calling it now? Margaret's expression grew more serious. Harold, there's something else. My grandson at the law firm overheard Marcus on the phone with someone. It didn't sound like a pleasant conversation. There was talk about payments being overdue and consequences if the debt wasn't settled soon. That explained the urgency. Marcus wasn't just looking for me out of regret or family feeling. He was looking for me because dangerous people were closing in on him. And he now knew that I was his only possible salvation. Over the next few days, reports of Marcus's search efforts became increasingly desperate and invasive. Pete told me that Marcus had returned to the neighborhood multiple times, knocking on doors and asking neighbors if they had seen me. He had even approached homeless individuals on the street, showing them a photo of me and offering money for information. He looked terrible, Harold, Pete reported during one of our conversations, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were wrinkled. He needed a shave, and his hands were shaking. He had kept checking his phone like he was expecting bad news. But it was Amanda Sterling who provided the most revealing information about Marcus's situation. Her law firm had been contacted by Marcus no fewer than 6 times in the past week, each call more desperate than the last. He's offering to pay us a substantial fee just to help him locate you, she told me during one of our meetings. He claims it's a family emergency and that you're in danger on the streets. He's even suggested that we could bill him for finding you and arranging a reconciliation. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. What exactly did he say about a reconciliation? Amanda consulted her notes. He said, and I quote, "I realize I may have been hasty in asking Harold to find alternative living arrangements. I'm prepared to welcome him back into our home and provide for his care. I just need to find him first." He's completely rewritten the narrative of what happened. The honesty was breathtaking. Marcus was now painting himself as a concerned family member who had simply suggested I might be happier elsewhere, rather than the man who had screamed at me to live with the homeless and slammed the door in my face. "Has he mentioned anything about the inheritance?" I asked. Amanda's expression grew knowing. Not directly, but he did ask several pointed questions about estate law, and whether someone could claim an inheritance on behalf of a family member who might be incapacitated or unable to manage their own affairs. So that was his angle. Marcus was positioning himself as my caretaker, hoping to gain control over my inheritance by claiming I was too old or mentally incompetent to manage it myself. The calculation behind it was chilling. It was Father Thomas who brought me the news that Marcus had escalated his search to an almost stalking level. The priest visited me at the hotel, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious concern. "Harold, I think you should know that Marcus has been essentially camping out near the church and the shelter. He's there when I arrive in the morning, and he's still there when I leave at night. He approaches anyone who looks like they might be homeless or in need, showing them your picture. Has he bothered you again directly?" Father Thomas nodded gravely. Yesterday, he cornered me as I was leaving and became quite aggressive. He accused me of hiding you and said that if anything happened to you, because I wouldn't reveal your location, it would be on my conscience. When I explained that I genuinely didn't know where you were staying, he didn't believe me. The priest paused, choosing his words carefully. Harold, I've seen desperate people before, but there's something different about Marcus. This isn't just about finding you. He seems terrified, like he's running out of time. That evening, I decided it was time to see Marcus's desperation for myself. I put on some of my old clothes from the shelter, pulled a baseball cap low over my face, and positioned myself across the street from the riverside shelter. I didn't have to wait long. Marcus's car pulled up just as the dinner line was forming. He got out, and I was shocked by his appearance. Pete had been right. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. His movements were jerky, almost frantic. I watched as he approached person after person in the dinner line, showing them what I assumed was my photo. Most people shook their heads and moved away from him quickly, clearly uncomfortable with his intensity. A few accepted money from him in exchange for brief conversations, but I could see from their body language that they had no useful information to share. At one point, Marcus grabbed a young man by the arm when the man tried to walk away. I could see them arguing, with Marcus gesturing wildly while the young man tried to pull free. Eventually, someone from the shelter staff intervened, and Marcus was forced to back off. But it was what happened next that truly revealed the depth of his desperation. As he walked back to his car, I saw him pull out his phone and make a call. Even from across the street, I could hear the tension in his voice as he spoke. "I'm telling you, I'm doing everything I can to find him," he said, his voice carrying in the evening air. "I've checked every shelter, every soup kitchen, every place homeless people gather. He's got to be somewhere. No, I understand the deadline. I know what happens if I don't pay. Just give me a few more days, please." When he ended the call, Marcus stood by his car for several minutes, his head in his hands. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then, I remembered the sound of the door slamming in my face. I remembered sleeping in my car in a Walmart parking lot on the night of my daughter's funeral. I remembered the way he had called me a useless burden and told me to go live with the other homeless bums. Marcus had made his choices when he thought I was powerless and worthless. Now that he knew the truth about who I really was, he was desperate to undo those choices. But some actions have consequences that can't be reversed with apologies or money. As I watched him drive away that night, still searching for the man he had discarded, I realized that Marcus was about to learn a very hard lesson about the difference between having power and being at someone else's mercy. Tomorrow, I would let him find me, but it would be on my terms, and he would discover that the homeless man he had been desperately seeking had become someone with the power to either save him or destroy him completely. I chose to reveal myself on a Tuesday morning, exactly 6 weeks after Marcus had thrown me out. The location was deliberate, the steps of Morrison and Associates, where Marcus would be arriving for what he believed was a routine consultation about locating me. What he didn't know was that I would be waiting for him. I arrived early, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that my new assistant had procured for me. The transformation was remarkable. I looked nothing like the broken man who had slept in shelters just days before. I positioned myself on a bench across from the law firm, close enough to observe, but far enough to control the timing of our encounter. Marcus's car pulled up at exactly 9:45, 15 minutes early for his 10 o'clock appointment. Even from a distance, I could see that his condition had deteriorated further. His movements were erratic, and he kept checking his phone with the nervous energy of a man running out of time. He stood on the sidewalk for several minutes, gathering himself before entering the building. I watched him take deep breaths, straighten his rumpled tie, and run his hands through his unkempt hair. He was preparing for what he probably thought would be another dead-end meeting about finding his missing father-in-law. I waited another 10 minutes before walking across the street and entering the building. The receptionist recognized me immediately. I'd become quite familiar to the staff over the past week. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," she said with a respectful smile. "Ms. Sterling is expecting you in conference room B." As I walked down the hallway, I could hear Marcus's voice through the closed door of conference room A. He was speaking rapidly, his tone increasingly desperate as he explained his urgent need to locate me. "I'm willing to pay whatever it takes," I heard him say. "This isn't just about family anymore. Harold could be in real danger on the streets. He's not a young man, and he's been missing for weeks now." I paused outside the door, listening to him spin his web of false concern. It was fascinating to hear how he had rewritten our history, transforming himself from the villain into the worried family member desperate to rescue his father-in-law from homelessness. Amanda Sterling met me at the door of conference room B. "Are you ready for this?" she asked quietly. I nodded, straightening my tie, more than ready. She led me to conference room A and knocked gently before opening the door. Marcus was seated at the far end of the long table, papers scattered in front of him, his phone clutched in one hand. He looked up expectantly, probably hoping for good news about the search. His expression went through a series of rapid changes when he saw me. First, confusion, as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. Then recognition, his eyes widening as he realized who was standing in the doorway. Finally, something between relief and terror as the implications began to sink in. "Harold." His voice was barely a whisper. I entered the room slowly, taking my time, letting him absorb the transformation. I was no longer the broken, pleading man he had thrown out 6 weeks ago. I was someone else entirely. Someone with power, someone with options, someone who could afford a $1,500 suit and the best legal representation money could buy. "Hello, Marcus," I said calmly, taking a seat at the opposite end of the table. "I understand you've been looking for me." Marcus struggled to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "Harold, thank God. I've been worried sick about you. When you left that night, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I've been searching everywhere." "Sit down, Marcus," I interrupted, my voice quiet, but carrying unmistakable authority. He sat immediately, his hands trembling as he placed them flat on the table. "Harold, I know I said some things that night that I didn't mean. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. Losing Sarah affected me more than I realized, and I took it out on you unfairly." I leaned back in my chair, studying him with the detached interest of someone examining an insect under a microscope. "Is that your version of what happened? That you said some things you didn't mean?" Marcus swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, despite the air conditioning. "I know I asked you to find other arrangements, but I never meant for you to end up on the streets. I thought you had friends, other family members who could help." "Other family members," I repeated slowly. "Like my father, perhaps." The color drained from Marcus's face. He glanced at Amanda Sterling, then back at me, clearly realizing that I knew about the investigation and its results. "Harold, I can explain about that. I hired the investigators because I was trying to help you. I thought maybe there were family resources you didn't know about, people who could provide better support than I could." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. How thoughtful of you. And what did you discover during this investigation to help me? Marcus's mouth opened and closed several times before he found his voice. I discovered that you're not who we thought you were, that your real name is Harold Whitmore, Jr., and that you're the heir to a significant fortune. A significant fortune, I muse. That's one way to put it. Would you like to know exactly how significant, Marcus? He nodded mutely, his eye fixed on my face. I pulled out a document from the folder Amanda had prepared for me. Whitmore Industrial Holdings is worth approximately $4.7 billion. The personal trust fund that has been accumulating interest for 38 years is worth an additional $800 million. All of it now under my direct control. My Marcus made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The magnitude of what he had thrown away was clearly overwhelming him. But here's the interesting part, Marcus, I continued, my voice remaining perfectly calm. My father's will contains a very specific clause about family members who mistreat the heir. Would you like to know what that clause says? Marcus shook his head frantically. Harold, please let me explain. I was desperate. I have debts, serious debts to dangerous people. I was facing consequences that could have destroyed my life, maybe even ended it. When I threw you out, I didn't know who you really were. Ah, there it is, I said, leaning forward slightly. The truth finally comes out. You threw me out because you thought I was worthless, a burden you could discard without consequences. But now that you know I'm worth billions of dollars, suddenly you want to make amends. Tears were streaming down Marcus's face now. Please, Harold, I'm begging you. These people I owe money to, they're not the kind of people who accept late payments. They've already made threats. If I don't come up with $600,000 by Friday, they're going to... Stop, I said sharply. I don't want to hear about your gambling debts or your poor choices. I don't want to hear your excuses or your apologies. I stood up, straightening my jacket. Do you remember what you said to me the night you threw me out? You told me to go live with the other homeless bums where I belonged. You called me a useless old bastard and slammed the door in my face on the day I buried my daughter. Marcus was sobbing openly now. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do anything to make this right. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life. I'll make sure you have everything you need. Please, just help me this one time. I walked slowly around the table until I was standing behind his chair. Marcus, I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you. He wiped his eyes and looked up at me hopefully. You showed me exactly who you are when you thought I had no power, no money, no way to fight back. You revealed your true character when you believed there would be no consequences for your cruelty. And now, you want me to save you because you've discovered I have something you need. I placed my hand on the back of his chair and leaned down so my mouth was close to his ear. The answer is no. Marcus twisted around to look at me, panic replacing hope in his eyes. But you can't just let them kill me. I'm family. I was married to your daughter. You were married to my daughter, I agreed calmly. But you forfeited any claim to family consideration the moment you threw me out like garbage. Family is supposed to protect each other, support each other, show loyalty and love. You showed me none of those things. Marcus grabbed my arm, his grip desperate. Please, Harold, I'll do anything. I'll sign over the house. I'll give you everything I own. Just help me this once." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. "Remove your hand, Marcus." He let go immediately, stepping back. "You don't seem to understand," I said, my voice completely calm. "I don't need your house. I don't need anything you own. I am worth more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. The only thing you have that I might have wanted was respect and kindness for an old man who had just lost his daughter. And you made it very clear that those were things you weren't willing to give." I walked here toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Oh, and Marcus, that clause in my father's will that I mentioned, it states that anyone who mistreats a member of the Whitmore family is permanently barred from any financial assistance from the estate. Even if I wanted to help you, which I don't, I legally cannot." Marcus collapsed back into his chair, the weight of his situation finally crushing him completely. "What am I going to do?" I straightened my tie and smiled. "I have no idea, Marcus, but I'm sure you'll figure something out. After all, you're the one who told me that family has to stick together. Perhaps you should try calling some of yours." As I walked out of that conference room, leaving Marcus broken and defeated behind me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the satisfaction of revenge, but the quiet contentment of justice finally served. 6 months later, I was living in a beautiful home overlooking the ocean, far from the city and the Tasic memories it held. I had taken control of Whitmore Industrial Holdings and was using the company's resources to fund homeless shelters and support services in Sarah's memory. I never saw Marcus again, though I heard through Amanda that he had been forced to declare bankruptcy and had lost everything. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a profound sense of liberation from the toxic relationship that had defined the worst period of my life. Sometimes in the evening, I would sit on my deck watching the sunset and think about Sarah. I wished she could have known the truth about our family, could have seen the good that came from reclaiming my heritage. But mostly, I was grateful that I had finally learned the difference between being alone and being free. The man who had thrown me away, thinking I was worthless, had taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that true power isn't about money or influence. It's about knowing your own worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. I was finally home. Kisand, did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.